Today I have Louis with me. Louis is a friend from school, but also one of the most hardworking and inspiring people I know. From the days of Melbourne High, he ducks the cohort with a perfect 99.95, went on to get a Chancellor's Scholarship at the University of Melbourne studying science, majoring in mechatronics, and is now studying postgraduate medicine. He's got an array of life experiences which I'm hoping to extract from and get insights to today. So Louis, thanks very much for joining me to film this. Could you tell everyone a bit about your background and some of the events that made you who you were today?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Prabs, and that's way too many compliments. But yeah, as Prabs said, I'm currently studying medicine at the University of Melbourne. I'm going to third year, and I come from a background of science, majoring in mechatronics. And similar to Prabs, it came through Melbourne High. It was in the same class as him. And yeah, I think that's the main things in terms of my studies. I did come from a whole schooling or public school background, all the way from primary school into like middle school into high school. So I think that was a very, very interesting experience and might be slightly different to Prabsy there. Um, and on top of that, I think on top of studies, I think it's always good to have your own hobbies as well. I know that Prabsy loves his cricket. For me, I love my tennis. I love my outdoors. And I think that's probably like who I am as a person.
And do you think, having been through public school the whole way,
Yeah.
was that a strength, a disadvantage?
Yeah, I think it's how you look at it, yeah. So like I think there's obviously going to be like benefits and disadvantages to the public schooling system. I think like the benefits is like you meet a really wide range of people from all walks of life, and I think I'm very fortunate to go through the selector school program where people come in from all across the states. We had like mates coming in from like Ballarat, coming into Melbourne just to study for the day and going back home to Ballarat. And I think it's always a very, very interesting to see people from different backgrounds, meet people from all walks of life, all studying on all learning backgrounds, as compared to private schools, which generally tends to, I guess, like students with more well-off families. But yeah, I think there are just definitely going to be like some disadvantages of the private schooling system in some sense as well. I think with the students I tutor, so I do tutoring as as a job. So with the students I tutor, I think generally speaking, like the private school students tend to be like I guess like a bit more spoon-fed in their schooling as compared to like the public school system, which is honestly for the most part like free for all. So going into uni, I think a lot of students from the public schooling system tend to be like a bit more independent in their learning, and I think that's a very big strength of the public schooling system. However, I think just as has benefits, there are disadvantages. Like the facilities in the public school system often aren't like up to scratch for the most part, as compared to like the private system. And I think another thing that I do want to touch on is like probably scaling in the public school sector as well. Like sometimes when you're stuck in a public school, some of the subjects in VC especially don't scale as well as compared to private schools, and I think that potentially does halter the potential of some students within those schools.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that then, because
Yeah.
there might be some people watching this who don't understand scaling to the way you know about it. So
Mm.
what is scaling and how does it work?
Yeah. So I don't think anyone can give you like the full definition of scaling or how it actually works in VC. And you hear rumors everywhere, but in general, essentially what it does is depending on how your school and that particular cohort does in the VC exams, your SAC scores will be altered in a way that reflects the exam performance. And I guess the whole goal of this is to make sure that there is fairness across all schools around the state and what the SAC marks are. Obviously, some SACs in some schools are going to be more difficult than other SACs in other schools. So I think it's designed to better suit that. But in some cases, like if you're a particularly strong student in a certain cohort that doesn't do very well, I think there are like rumors that say your own study score won't be influenced by others if you're ranked one. But in all honesty, I do think it's still impacted on like a big like the proportion of your cohort that does well as compared to doesn't do well.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate I guess public school versus private school.
Yeah,
I think from where we are in uni, there's people from all sorts of
exactly. Yeah.
backgrounds and schools that have made it through. So there's probably no clear winner, and no option is a strict no to success.
Yeah.
Obviously, some routes are more challenging, and some routes require you to take more of the onus on yourself to put in some of the work, whereas others you have more people helping you along the way. So while different people have different starting points, it's still at the end of the day up to the student themselves, and with the right set of skills. And in any school, you're going to have some group of students who are like-minded and high achieving, and it's just about who you associate with, and how much you put in from yourself. So looking back at school, what were you
Mm.
like as a student? What were some of the key things that you felt contributed to your success?
I think from the beginning, I don't think I was the very strongest student going into like a selector school. Like for example, I think I remember in year eight, I did try to get into selector school, but I actually barely got in. I was offered a late offer into Melbourne High, so I wouldn't say I was a very high achiever from the get-go, and like for a long time, for the longest time, I remember I always struggled in English. My writing was never very good, so heading into Melbourne High, I think that was a very big barrier for me. And maybe that stems from the fact that I was brought up in China for quite a few years, and I speak Chinese at home. I don't really use English back at home, so I think that maybe influences it. But on top of that, I think in Melbourne High, I think I would say, as perhaps he said, I would say I definitely was quite hardworking, just like himself. I think that is a really big part of success. Like, um, the hours that you put in, the effort that you put in often does reflect in the exam marks that you score. I think that is probably the biggest factor of success, in my opinion. Some people say like some people, some students are particularly gifted. I don't deny that, but for the most part, most of us do need to put in a lot of effort to score like really good marks.
And yes, you do. When I recall back to the days of school and now in uni, you do strike me as one of the most hardworking people I know. What like, motivates you to work hard, or what do you think is a reason you can work so much harder than lots of people?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's really hard to say like how much harder you work compared to other people, and you don't want to deny like anyone's hard work either. So I think for me, I think the most important things is to try to keep motivated through like planning ahead. I don't know about you, Prabsi, but like I always like to plan the week ahead, and I know that you like to plan ahead as well for the most part. And for example, like I would always want to set ahead of time, like for the coming week. What are the goals I want to like accomplish? Maybe I want to finish a particular chapter of the textbook, or I want to complete a set number of questions from the textbook or from checkpoints for VCE. I think that's always a good thing to go about with things, and you have a target to work towards where you get a bit of satisfaction. And I always advocate that once you reach a goal, you should take a break. You should enjoy something out of like studying, be it like sports or some outdoors activity or whatever you enjoy, like TV, play some video games. I think that's all very fair things to do after you can accomplish your goals. So you're always working towards something. I think that's the only way to really stay motivated, especially in a very long, grueling year such as year 12. Is that your experience, perhaps?
Yeah, I think. I'm probably not as explicit with like I
Yeah,
want to get these things done, but I always have an idea in my mind.
yeah,
And I think that's probably the next level for me would be to just say like, okay, each day or each week, like these are the particular things I want to get done. I think
yeah,
it's a very cool point to say like after you've reached that goal to have some sort of enjoyment factor because it's easy just to, say I want to get this chapter done, complete it, and then go on to the next chapter. And then it sort
yeah.
of can drag on and you're sort of forcing yourself to do it. Um,
Yeah, I think the issue with that is like you see a lot of students, especially in year 12, they do really well for like the first few sacks. And there is a tendency to burn out if you keep going and just keep grinding through things. I think I heard in Daniel Amin's video, so Daniel Amin's one of Ethan's colleagues as well, that there was this tendency to complete a whole subject before the start of school. And I think thinking back, I think that was And that was the thing that definitely happened around us. And for me, it's not an approach I took. And I found that sometimes working too far ahead meant that once you go into that particular class, you're gonna forget the stuff again, and you just end up wasting time learning it earlier in the year, and then relearning it again. Yeah, I think that that's definitely a point that really stayed with me.
Yeah, it's one of those weird things where as we sort of got to the older year levels, there were, all sorts of reports of people saying, well, I finished the course in like year 10, or I finished the
Yeah,
year 12 course in year 10, year 9, year 11. And I'm not sure, it'd be interesting to see how these students end up. But the people I know who've done like really well didn't do that. They were always a little bit ahead,
yeah,
but they didn't just completely like finish the entire course over the preceding years. It was always sort of being a
yeah.
month or a term ahead and having some sort of advanced knowledge, but not just like rote learning and memorizing lots of texts. So, what were some of the ways you did try and get ahead in high school and now in uni?
Yeah, I think that's a really really good question as well. I think in high school, getting ahead is quite hard. So like in high school, I don't think we were the most independent learners per se. A lot of times we were spoon-fed by our teachers, told to do exercise 1 to 5, whatever, right? But I think to stay ahead, I think what I tell my students as well nowadays is to stay several chapters ahead, and what that means is just doing prior readings, just having a brief idea of what's coming up. I think is always really, really good. And if you have the time, if you have the passion, also trying to complete some of textbook questions. I think about textbook questions. Some people don't like textbook questions, but I think about them as like the fundamentals. Like you always need the fundamentals. It's kind of like a toolbox. If you don't have the tools in your toolbox, you can't build up to the harder questions that you get in like company worksheets or in like checkpoints or exam questions. I don't think it's worth jumping straight into the exam questions. I think it's good just to build up those textbook skills. So what I did was I just completed like textbook chapters, maybe like saying 3 chapters ahead at all times. That made my learning in class much much more easy. I think that's the case for high school. I think nowadays in uni it's slightly different. I guess there's not really a prescribed set of things that you need to do. There is an expectation that you learn it yourself, right? I think on like it really depends on you as a person. I think everyone works slightly differently. I think for me, the lectures are always a good starting point. It gives you like the direction to be going in terms of study, and on top of that, I like to read. I actually like to read physical books as well. So I like to borrow books from the library just to read content, just give me a bit more understanding of it, and backing it up with more up-to-date information from online resources, I think is a good way to stay ahead, for example. Yeah.
What made you interested in like the physical books? Is that like how did that start?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I just find myself with a physical book as a way, kind of like to disconnect from the online world for one, and I just like the feel of the book. Not gonna lie to you, but I think everyone has their different opinions and things, and it's also easier for me to flip through different sections of the books. Like you can put marks in the books, and you can jump through sections. I think slightly faster than you could in PDFs. And yeah, I don't know about you, perhaps. Yeah, do you read much of like physical books?
You'll have to like be quiet with the librarians knowing you're marking all their books, but I'm sure it's sticky notes.
Yeah.
I think one thing about actual like physical books is that supposedly your recall is better because
Uh,
there's things have like a fixed position on the page. So,
yeah.
if there's this particular like sentence, you can say, all right, you can recall that sentence was at this position.
Mm,
Whereas sometimes the issue with a PDF is like you're scrolling and there is no top of the page because
mm,
it's always going from bottom to top, and it's harder for your brain to, I guess, recall a fixed position, which
mm.
then influences the recall later on. I think for me, again, physical books are a lot easier to study from because, like, looking at a screen for a long time is quite hard.
Yeah.
Now you lose some of the maneuverability with, things like Control F,
Yeah.
which sometimes gets used. And I think the main thing is just practically like having to carry books around or purchase books or borrow them from the library, which is where uni is good because if you're already on campus
Yeah.
and the library's there, it's nice. But I think yeah, for like if there's some sort of textbook that you think's important, like I in school had all physical textbooks,
Yeah, same.
um, which we used to lug around in big
Yeah,
piles. And yeah, when I was studying from a textbook, it was a lot easier just to do it in person,
yeah,
or physically, especially when you're doing lots of reading from it. I
yeah,
think you get away with different things. If it's just the maths textbook online, and I need to, you know, just do questions from it. I think that's fine to have that on the
yeah.
laptop.
I
But
agree. Yeah, if it's
reading
a
and diagrams, yeah.
yeah, if it's a question bank, I think it's totally fine to be online. It's just literally questions on a page. But like if it's actually content, I agree. Like I think the recall is much better, like in physical textbooks for me at least.
Hmm. And that's a an interesting point you mentioned earlier, just with like trying to get ahead, using the textbook as one source, using the textbook questions as a sort of builder to the exam style questions later on,
Yeah,
which are a bit more complicated, as a way of learning the principles. And another thing is like if you are going to try and get ahead and learn things in the holidays, it's always good to set a like recall date for that particular material. Because I
yeah,
think when we want to get ahead, there's a bit of ego in saying like, I want to try and like get as much done as possible. But it's better to get, two or three revision sets in of that material as well to help you remember it long term. Otherwise, you
yeah,
learn it once and then you hop on the forgetting curve by the
yeah,
time that you learn the subject, which might be one of the pitfalls for the people who, do all these like year 12 and year 10
yeah.
accelerations because you learn it once and then by the time you get to year 12, you've forgotten so much of that. Whereas what you need is those repeated uh, revisions of that material to help get you up to speed.
Yeah, I agree. I think yes, the consolidation phase is very important. Like you learn something, but it's always good to consolidate it. And I think in medicine, for me at least, I think the question banks online are a very good source to consolidate your understanding for the most part. But back in high school, I think like again, questions from textbooks, from checkpoints, from past exams are always good to consolidate your knowledge before starting some new content. I agree. It's better to consolidate especially after if you learn, especially after you learn something for the first time.
Now, you mentioned that, having checkpoints and goals that you can accomplish is one thing that helps you get more work done. Are there times where you have to like force yourself to study, or you're not looking forward to, or it's hard to study, or do you
Yeah.
genuinely enjoy it and love the subject matter?
Yeah. I think in year 12, I think there's inevitability that some of the subjects that you do, you may not enjoy very much. And I think for the most case, for a lot of students, it could be English. Yeah. I think it's always hard to make yourself sit down and write essays. I think, at least for me in year 12, it was very, very difficult to do so. And it was very, very tedious. But again, I think in those cases, being able to set yourself goals. For me, for example, in English language, I told myself I have to spend each week at least doing like one piece of writing, either being like an analytical commentary in English language or a piece of essay. I think it was just a good way to get structured and always getting something done. But yeah, it is quite hard to get motivated in those subjects. And I think one of the good resources is your mates. I think your friends or friend group around you does have a big influence of how well you do. We had a very, very like high achieving group in year 12 with Prabsy and everyone around us. And I think that it kind of like gave you a bit of peer pressure to also staying top on top of things as well. I think that's also a very important point that I do want to raise.
Yeah, looking back was such a big
Yeah,
factor. Just
yeah, it
having
was.
so many people around us working hard, and then you just wanted to, you felt like you're getting left behind if you're doing anything else. There wasn't like many options to, go do other things when everyone was there in class, switched on,
Yeah,
getting after it. We also all used to sit next to each other
exactly.
in
Yeah.
the classes and work together, and so yeah, that was such an important factor. Now, you mentioned sort of growing up in a non-English speaking home
Mm.
to then sort of doing really, really well on VCE English or Year 12 English. Uh, Maybe to start with, what made you choose English language over
Mm.
mainstream English?
I think that's a really good question. Just as I said before, like I think I always struggled in English, especially like year 9, year 10, where I really had to pick which English subject I'm going to take in year 12, right? Or year 11, year 12. And I think at that time, I was just not finding myself like very suited for English mainstream. I did not really enjoy analyzing like novels or poems or movies. I think that was not my strong suit. And I think what I've heard from English language back then was it's more of like a sciencey English subject in the way that there was a lot of content to learn, which is definitely true with the subject. And once you learn that content, you apply it in a more sciencey way, breaking down language as a whole with used within a text. So picking out each part of a text and analyzing how the language is used for the author's benefit, for example. And I think for me, that was a bit more intuitive. And it also meant that everyone really started at a very similar level, which leveled up the playing field. So if you were able to work a bit harder in the subject, you're able to achieve much greater things, in my opinion. There's not this idea that if you don't do well in year 9, year 10, you have no chance in year 11, year 12. And I think for mainstream English, I was behind. And that meant that in year 11, year 12, I had to work really, really, really hard to really catch up to the high scoring achievers in mainstream English. I think that was my take in year 10, why I chose English language over English.
That's fascinating. And now I want to do you justice. So what was your study score in Lang?
I was quite lucky, I think, in my year, but I did score a 48 in England as a raw score, yeah.
Yes, and for those of you not from Victoria, it's like 48 is like 48 out of 50, which is like S tier sort of HSC equivalent would be something in the high 90s, I imagine. Now, one thing that when I look back was everyone when I was deciding on subjects in year 9, year 10,
Yeah.
you you say, okay, I'm going to do like, chemistry, method specialist, whatever. And people said like, oh, those subjects are going to like be a lot of work. They're
Mm,
going to take a lot of your time. So you're best off like going with regular English instead of Ing Lang. And when I look back, I kind of feel that was the wrong advice.
mm,
I kind of feel like if you're math science orientated, then like Ing Lang seems like a really good option.
yeah.
And I sort of just because everyone said, oh, this will be too much work or like this it'll be extra. Um, it sort of put me off doing it, whereas I should have, in reality, I should have, checked out
Mm,
what the syllabus and course material and question types were like. But at that level, when you're only, sort of 14,
yeah.
15, it's a bit too early. Well, not too early. I just didn't have the maturity to go down that route. So if someone's sort of year 9, year 10 deciding on
Mm,
subjects, I think most people would be that sort of let's imagine the math sciencey student.
yeah.
Um, would you suggesting Lang or how would you suggest people get some experience of what it's like?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think it's always important to raise the point that not all the schools offer England. A lot of the public schools actually don't offer it as a subject, which is quite unfortunate because of like staffing issues and all that. But I think to get a real good taste of England, it's always good to, as Prabhi said, to read through the study design of what it actually involves. So just a quick rundown, for example, in like units 1 and 2, you're focusing on meta language, and for those that don't know, meta language is essentially like language we use to describe language. Yeah. So, for example, we can label something as a simile or a metaphor. These are all examples of meta language. And then when we move on to later parts of Unit 1, we talk a bit about like child language acquisition or how children actually learn language, and also a bit about the history of English, as well as how languages can also mix together. In year 12, you're more focused about like how English is used within Australian society, looking at the different situations behind its usage. I think it's always good to look at English language as really just a subject on linguistics. So if you're not too familiar with linguistics, it's always good to do some research on what it actually involves. But in my opinion, I think if you're like more science, more maths inclined, you like a bit more like rote learning, and then a bit more content in your subject, I think English language is definitely the subject for you. I would disagree that you have to put in much, much more time as compared to mainstream English. for the most part. The structure is very, very different. It's a totally different subject, in my opinion, in the way that in our exams we have short answer questions with an analytical commentary and an essay. I think the hardest part about Inglang is mostly going to be the timing. The exam is very short. It's around 2 hours with 15 minutes reading time, where you're expected to finish essentially like two pieces of writing and one set of short answer questions. Whereas in mainstream English, you have that 3 hours for three pieces of writing. So I think the time pressure is definitely there for English language. But other than that, I think the subjects are very different. So it's not fair to say one is totally harder than the other.
Yeah, and I think for people watching this, if you're the type of person who's watching this video, then don't be dissuaded by people saying, "Oh, don't do this subject because
Yeah.
it's too much work. Don't do specialist because it's too much work," or
Mm,
or something like that. I think ultimately, if you work hard and you apply yourself, you'll have time to do well in any of these subjects.
I
And it's
agree.
about picking things that you're good at, that suit your strengths, and that you enjoy. And the work will come. You can always like manage work by getting starting a bit earlier, getting some
Mm,
additional help, and you'll learn to balance things and become more efficient with it. So I don't think picking more content heavy subjects
yeah.
is a factor that people should necessarily be using or parents should be thinking about. Now, you have been tutoring Englang for
Yeah.
quite a while. What are some of the things you've learned about what makes a good Englang student, and what are some of the things that you did well that students can do as well?
Yeah, I think for Englang, probably the hardest thing to do is staying motivated. I think, as we said before, like with English subjects, it's always hard to practice writing. Like, I find students are really good at learning the content early and they, like, back to front, know the content, but being able to apply it in written pieces is always difficult. So, what I tell my students to always do is to, yes, complete like a glossary of like new terms, which we call our meta language terms for English language. And I think after that, I think it's also very important that they do start developing a bank of quotes for their writing. So in English language, we still need a bank of quotes, but those bank of quotes come from like media resources. So starting that early is also important. And it's hard to like force students to write, but making sure that they know that they should be trying to write at least a bit a week is going to be very important for success. I think those that do really well in English language start off early and make sure that they submit work regularly throughout the year to their teachers, their tutors to get really good feedback. I think for English subjects, the only real way to improve your writing is to get feedback either from teachers, your tutors, or even your peers. I think in year 12, I found it really useful to get peer feedback. Even though it may not be the most useful at all times, sometimes people have differing opinions, especially on writing. I think it's always good to get everyone's opinion of how you can improve. I think that's very, very, very important part of learning. And I think you raised some good points about like choosing subjects not necessarily based off like how difficult they are on paper. I think another thing to consider is how well the subjects can marry together. I think some subjects really do come in packages. What I mean by that is like take for example like methods and spec, right? A lot of the content that you learn in methods will be applied in specialists, so you don't really have to relearn the content as per se. Another combination I think in our days was physics and specialists. I think a whole section on physics was essentially shared with specialist maths. Um, Another example could be like chemistry and physics. A lot of the content is very similar, so it reduces the amount that you have to study. Chemistry and biology is another good example of a good combination. I think nowadays in chemistry, there's this section on medicinal chemistry and also a bit about fuels, which is also shared with the biology subjects. So sometimes some of the subjects do have crossover. In those cases, you have to learn less. And I think it's a really good opportunity to really harness these crossovers and maybe take two subjects which might be quite similar. That way, you probably have to study a bit less and you can understand the knowledge much better, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Like people are often afraid
Yeah.
of doing specialist maths, but then
Yeah.
they often don't factor in how that will also help your methods as well,
Yes,
doing
exactly. Yeah.
a bit of harder concepts. Now, I love your point about feedback because I think, looking back as a more sort of shy, awkward uh, student, I think that was one of the reasons why, English was a bit harder for me because I was a bit more nervous to approach peers to ask, them to think what about my work, ask teachers, for feedback. And that's why maths and some of the sciences are a bit easy because the book just has all the answers and that gives you all the feedback as
Yeah,
well.
exactly.
So if you are that sort of nervous and student and you're not necessarily used to, asking for help, that is a very important thing to do because that seems to be the key thing in English. Now, one of the temptations though will be, can't I just use like an AI for feedback and train the AI? Uh,
Yeah.
how do you think an AI would compare as a feedback giver compared to, a peer, a teacher, a tutor?
That's a really good question because, like, if I was taking VC in 2025, I think AI would be like definitely a big, very big tool that I might be using. I think in 2020 when we did our VC, there was no such thing as ChatGPT, or ChatGPT was in its dawn stages, right? So I think it was never a thing to use to be really tempted by AI. But I think for students going through VC now, I think AI is definitely something that is quite influential. And to be honest with you, I don't know about you, Prabsi, but I definitely use AI in my uni studies. Not in the sense that you should get AI to write stuff for you. I have had students in English language submit work that's totally AI, and I think that in those cases, not very, very helpful at all, right? Like you're not putting in any effort to put out a piece. And in that case, it's not your own work. The feedback you're going to be getting is not going to be great because it's not going to be applied to your own writing. And in terms of like getting feedback from AI, like AI can provide, I think, in general, good advice about like potentially content or potentially like your own grammar in writing. That could be a really good thing to use it for. But in terms of like matching the expectations from teachers in the subject or matching the expectations from the study design, it doesn't know. Yeah, like it doesn't know how to market properly. Like teachers and tutors have had so many years of experience teaching students. They've seen which students do really well, which type of writing styles work, and that's the advice that you should be getting. I think it's a good start to be using AI to check for like grammar, checking for like major mistakes. However, to get solid feedback about where to really improve, where to take your writing to the next level, I think using giving to your teacher is really important to get some feedback. And another thing that I think is an issue with an AI is AI always tends to say your work is pretty good. Yeah, it never seems to tell you off that your writing is totally garbage, right? So I think your teachers, your tutors will have that opportunity to say that this is not up to scratch, and they will say it, right? Whereas AI will not. I think in that case, it's probably better to get feedback from your teachers.
That's a good point. You might have to prompt engineer and say, like, actors are super harsh, Ing
Yeah,
examiner, and
exactly
be
right.
cross
Yeah.
with me. I think with regard to AI, there's so many ways students can use it, but
Mm,
there's definitely ways that hinder learning and ways that help learning. So
yeah.
it's very easy to say, right, just write my whole essay for me, and then you go through and make some minor revisions, versus the people who write their essay themselves and then
Yeah.
say, okay, is there one or two pieces of feedback you think I can implement? Like that's a completely different way to use AI.
Yeah.
But you're right, the quality feedback, you want the highest quality feedback, and that's going to come
Yeah.
from people who know actually what the examiners are looking for, which are people who've done well previously and people who teach the subject.
Exactly. Yeah.
One key
Yeah.
thing that young students might be thinking about is, should I be getting tutoring? And then if I do get tutoring for something like
Mm,
Ing is it more helpful to get
mm.
a past student who's done very well in the subject and now is teaching, or someone who's an active professional teacher? Uh, which one of those would you say is the stronger option, or who should consider each of those options?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's always a good question to ask whether you need tutoring or not. Yeah, I tell this to all my student families as well as people that ask me for tutoring, such like family friends, because in some cases, I think students will do well regardless of whether they have a tutor or not, and it might not be the best use of time to actually get a tutor. I think in those cases, the students are self-motivated and they're able to access help from the school. They're happy to speak up. They don't need someone telling them what to do. In those cases, if they're like a very, very like independent learner, I don't think they need a tutor. And I think for a lot of students that did really well, for example, from Melbourne High, a lot of them didn't actually have any tutors for any of the subjects. And in those cases, I think just being independent, being able to guide your own study is sufficient. However, if you do like find that you're not able to lead your own study or you don't have that good direction of study, I think that's when a tutor comes into play. And the question of whether to get like a person who teaches the subject versus a past student, I think it comes down to several factors. I think first of all, it's always good to run a trial class with the tutor. Yeah, be it a past examiner, past teacher, past student, doesn't matter. I think it's always good to have a trial class and always try to organize a free trial class if possible. Any good tutor will offer to you. I can guarantee you that. And in those trial classes, I think it's good to think a bit about what kind of teaching style they have. I think everyone adapts to different teaching styles, and I cannot say that the way that I teach will apply for all my students. So always try to like investigate which style of teaching you like a bit more, and think about what kind of resources and feedback they're able to offer. Some tutors are happy to give you more feedback, whereas others probably take time to give you feedback. In those cases, I think avoid anyone that doesn't give you feedback, because that's a really important part of learning English. But in terms of like which one will help you succeed the most, I think that's hard to say. Yeah, that's very, very hard to say. Coming from a background as past student tutoring, obviously there's a bias to say that it's a better option, but I don't think it's necessarily the case. I do find that in terms of pricing, though, any past examiners, past teachers tend to be quite more expensive. But then again, they have much, much more experience in the field and probably are able to give you more niche and detailed feedback in that subject. So I think for students that are already doing pretty well and they want to step up even like one step further, I think finding like past teachers or past examiners might suit you a bit better. But for most other cases, I think a past student serves very, very similar functions and will essentially bring out similar outcomes as well from the students.
Yeah, it's probably an individualized
Yeah.
decision lots of people need to make. Some people will like having a sort of younger tutor that they can relate to a
Yeah.
bit more, have a chat with. Some people, even I'm sure there's good and bad, professional examiners turned tutors. So ultimately, you just want someone who you enjoy being in their class and you get high
Mm,
quality feedback from them. That is sort of worth the cost. And I think it's a great idea just to try out a
mm,
bunch of different tutors, be it for one or two lessons to see if they're helpful in what their style is like and whether that's the right fit for you. And the same thing can be said for people who are considering no tutoring versus tutoring. If you're genuinely considering it, then trying it out uh, is something that I probably recommend because just going off, one or two lessons, if it is a game changer for you, you can figure it out. And if it's not helpful, then you at least know. But yeah, if it's there as a free trial or as a free resource, I'd say make the most of it.
yeah.
Now, one thing I also wanted to talk about is you've not only done very well in Lang and sort of said
Mm,
that was a more the style of that subject suited you, but you did very well in the math side of things and the science side of things. If we recall back to our award ceremony after year 12, you came home with this bucket of subject awards for being the top in the cohort. I'd love to talk to you about the science side of things today. Now, you did chemistry and physics. I guess could you share? Number one, your study scores, but what you think you did that put you ahead of everyone else in those subjects.
Yeah, I did score like 50s in both chemistry and physics. And I think in those subjects, like the question of like what to do we score well? Again, depends on the student themselves. But for me, I think reflecting back, there's a few things that I think really help drive the success. I think with all the subjects, I want to stress again, like staying ahead, planning ahead is always very, very important. But I think for those subjects, one thing that I do tell my students a lot of the times is that exam questions year in, year out tend to be quite similar. The style of questions that come up tend to be quite similar. So I think the way that you should be studying is again building up those fundamentals through your textbook, then reinforcing it with practice questions, especially like practice exam questions. There will come to a stage that you've exposed yourself to almost all the exam style questions or the styles of questions that the exams might give you. And in those cases, I think um, you're probably quite ready for the exam for the most part. But I think in your interview with Daniel Armin, you also talked a bit about like the use of Edrolo. I think nowadays more schools have access to Edrolo. In those cases, it's also good to use like external resources such as Edrolo or watching videos on YouTube to really supplement your own learning. I think that's excellent. I think some students also trial flashcards. I think that's another point of discussion that we might also have in terms of like whether you use flashcards for those subjects. My opinion for chemistry and physics, probably not necessary, given that there's not too much recall required. But I think it is important to recognize that for both those subjects, even though they sound quite maths heavy, they're not really. I think reflecting back, the amount of theory probably outweighs the amount of calculations by a big margin for both subjects. So being able to understand the theory and apply the theory is critical. I think in those cases, I'd highly recommend for students during their classes to take notes. I think that's a highly contentious thing nowadays. Not many students actually take physical notes. What I tell my students is that taking physical notes really helps with recall. I don't know your experience with this, Prabzi, but I find it just much more useful in recall as compared to using online notes, for example. So that's that. I think that's my take on chemistry and physics. I think there's also another tendency to like complete hundreds of practice exams before the actual exam. I think there's not necessarily a need for that. For example, for me, in those subjects, I probably did a maximum of maybe 20 to 30 exams for each subject. I don't think you need to do hundreds. There's no point because the exam styles is the exam style. There's not much variability in all honesty.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So if we narrow down on this approach of how you studied, so you're in the class, so you've done some pre-reading before or pre-learning before the class.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah, I think pre-reading might just be as simple as, for me, just reading through chapters ahead of class. Yeah, just literally reading the textbook and taking some notes. Yeah, I think that's very important. Just taking down some key points from each section and trying out maybe a few questions. Yeah, I think for each textbook, there's like worked questions. I like to go through those before class, and maybe I'll sit the class and then I'll complete the textbook, the end of chapter questions. I think that's what it looks like for me. Yeah.
And what happens if you read the textbook and it just doesn't make any sense?
I think that's a really good point, and that's why I like to read ahead because once you finish the reading ahead, you know which sections you're not sure about, and you're able to ask questions in class. For a lot of students that have not read ahead, they don't know what questions to actually ask. Yeah, because they don't know which sections they don't understand until they actually apply it. So I think it's always good to read ahead and such that you can essentially direct your questions more so in class, in tutoring classes, whatnot.
Okay, so you do some sort of pre-learning on the topic just to get
Yeah.
prepared. You supplement that with a couple of questions before and after the class. Use the class itself
Mm,
to understand the concepts, take some notes down, and ask questions you have. And
mm.
then now that you've done that pre-learning and the class, how would you sort of review this material before a test or an exam?
Yeah, I think it depends on which kind of test and exam it is. I think for a lot of like chemistry and physics, like a test and exam, it's all very, very similar. I think the best things to do is make sure that you completed all the questions in the textbook, attempt a few practice worksheets, and then some practice sacks. I think that is honestly like sufficient to really review your content before actual like an actual sack kind of context. I'm not sure about you. What kind of other things did you do perhaps in your year?
I mean, it's always the case that what I did and now what I like suggest are different
Yeah.
things. I think looking back, it was a lot of pretty similar actually. Like I'd read the textbook before the class. I had done I forgot the name of our similar to Ed Rollo that website that we got
Oh, yeah.
access to.
Yeah, I forgot the
And
name.
then I also did take notes during the class. So
Yeah.
pretty similar. It was sort of like a sort of brute force
Yeah, it
approach.
is.
I think looking back, the ways it could have been a bit more optimized are to add some sort of active recall into that mix. So I think the biggest like thing with some of these science subjects is just try and understand the concept and be able to explain it as much as possible. So, rather than just simply like writing things out verbatim from the textbook, which is going to be probably better than typing, but also takes a bit more time. I think a good proxy is like before the class, like, can you actually explain, what that topic is? Can you teach it to a friend? And
Yeah,
so,
I think that's a very, very good point. I think that was also one thing that I wanted to raise just after you completed speaking. But teaching someone is definitely the best way to learn. I think in school we're taught about like the learning pyramid, where at the bottom it's like the lectures and reading and all that, whereas at the top of the learning period, the most important part or the point where you reach mastery is actually being able to explain it to someone such that they can understand essentially being able to teach others. And I think that's something that we actually did in our high school days. I think it's always like when your friend asks for help, I'm always a happy person to reach out and assist them. I think it's not just a way to help them out, but it's also a way for you to consolidate your own knowledge as well. If they're able to understand your explanation, you know that you're doing very well. You'd understand the content. You can only really teach something once you fully understand it. Yeah, that's a very, very good point.
yeah, and I think two important takeaways just from this bit are, have the courage to ask questions of your teachers.
Yeah,
If you're the student doesn't understand, like, do ask, and also like use how well you can explain the subject as an indicator for like
yeah,
what you need to like go and do some further learning in, and study more in.
yeah.
I think that those are two helpful takeaways. Now, could you contrast or analyze the similarities or differences between how you studied for English and how you studied for like chem and physics? Was there any glaring differences there, or were they largely similar?
I think similar in ways that there's a lot of time going into practice of like practice essays, practice ACs, practice short answer questions for England, and then as compared to like simply practice questions for physics and chemistry. But I think there are slight differences for the most part. I think for English language, there is a bit of like actual prior collection of examples. So for essay writing, for example, I think it is always important that throughout the weeks you try to aim to collect several quotes each week in preparation for your actual essay, as compared to like chemistry and physics. I think there is actually a textbook that's prescribed, and that textbook gives you a lot of the content information. In English language, there really isn't too much of a textbook. There is, I guess, but it's not probably the best resource to be learning from. And it probably does not hit all the points required as per the study design. So I think that's another thing that to raise about English language, that the textbook may not be your best friend. I think for the most part in our class, for example, not many people actually opened their textbook throughout the year. Simply because the content really didn't really match up to the standards expected from VCAR.
That's very helpful, and I think a lot of the people who are sort of thinking, all right, do I want to get tutoring? And then like a lot of people will say, all right, no, you're a hardworking student, like you'd be okay without it. But
Mm,
one benefit is to have like mentors like this, who, if you put the work in, they can teach you how to most effectively use that and say, now this is a poor quality resource, don't worry about that.
yeah,
Spend your time like doing this, learn this,
yeah,
utilize all that hard work in this most efficient ways, and that'll help boost your results.
yeah.
So I guess you tutor chem and physics as well. Who should be considering tutoring, and what are some of the benefits of it?
Yeah. So who should be considering the tutoring of chemistry and physics? I think if you found year 11, year 12, or year 11 very easy for both subjects, and you're a very independent learner, and you're interested in the subject, actually, know what you're doing and you know which questions are difficult. You know when to ask questions to your teachers in school. I don't think it's necessary to get a tutor. And I think I've actually told this to one of our family friends this year, that exact same thing, and they ended up scoring a perfect ATAR. Like, what was the point of you getting tutoring, right? If you got like tutoring, you still would have got a perfect ATAR. So I think in those cases, yes, n no tutoring really is required. But in cases where you did struggle in year 11, a lot of the parents that actually reach out to me tend to be like parents with students that didn't do that well in year 11, or in some cases, also students from like rural backgrounds where the quality of teaching or the facilities available to them may not be as comparable as like the metropolitan schools. I think in those cases, when you're not doing too well in year 11, you might need a bit more of tutoring for year 12. Or if you find yourself as a person that really takes instructions or likes to have a list of things set out for them, I think tutors are great because they're able to set out everything that you need to revise before next class. And that will in some way essentially be the list of things that you can work towards, gives you instructions or direction to work towards. I think that's also great. And some people are going to be less independent learners as compared to others. If you always want someone to be able to give you an answer or help you out with things, I think a tutor is a great resource. I think I don't know about other tutors, but the way that I operate is I'm always available to my students, literally like 24/7. And if they reach out by text, I'm happy to get back to them to give them an answer. And I think that for some students, getting that clarity before moving on is really important. So yeah, especially if you find yourself like a really shy person in class, like as perhaps he said, and are afraid to ask your teacher in class something, maybe a tutor is more of a friendly face that you're more happy to ask questions towards. I think in those cases might be more helpful.
That's a good point because you get to know each other a bit more closely. Whereas
Yeah,
sometimes with your teacher, like there's 20 students, one teacher, you can be a bit detached.
yeah.
Whereas especially if you get a one-on-one tutor, it's a lot more easy, I find, to build a relationship and ask questions. Now, I apologize for doing this, but I want to take your mind back to SWAT vac before you sat your Year 12 exams. What
Yeah.
was a day in the life like for you in those couple of weeks before you sat your VCE exams?
Yeah, I cannot lie. That time was very different to what they would expect. Like year 12s will be experiencing now. I think in just for your information, to those that are listening, we did our year 12 in COVID. So the picture of sort of back in year 12 during COVID, it might be slightly different. I think we couldn't really go out much. So it meant that much of our time, at least for me, was spent studying in swap back. And that was the period of time I was the most strict on myself in terms of my like study regiment. I essentially at that time, I already completed all the content I need for all my subjects. So swap back was just essentially for practice exams. What I did was each day I probably set out maybe 3 or 4 practice exams I wanted to complete. I know that sounds ridiculous for a lot of people, and that's a lot of time, but I went through them. And I think it's always good to allocate a bit of time each day to review maybe the practice exams you did the day before, just to make sure that you can correct it yourself and identify any major issues before moving on. So I did basically maybe 3 exams a day, 4 exams a day, and then allocated maybe 1 hour, 2 hours to go through yesterday's exams. I think that's what I did for SWAT. But still, given that we were in COVID and I did a lot of practice exams, I think it's still important to allocate some downtime. I think during SWAT, it was a time where I spent a lot of time doing like outdoor activities like running, when we were essentially like allowed to run outdoors. And I also spent a lot of the nights socializing with friends because SWAT is oftentimes like quite a lonely period because you don't see your mates. And I think during that time we did a bit of like with Prabsy and stuff, we did a bit of like Among Us over like over Zoom calls. Which is essentially just like online gaming, online socializing. I think that's still important to keep in touch. But yeah, for me, SWAT was really much about practice exams, as compared to like learning content. I think your goal, for all the students out there should be trying to finish all the content before SWAT, and SWAT should be just doing some practice exams and getting feedback for those exams. I think that's all I did in my year.
I agree. I think there's a common misconception I've heard where people say, I'm gonna, just revise the content a bit more before I go into the practice exams. But the
Mm,
practice exams themselves are the revision. They will tell you what you know and what you don't know. And then what
yes,
you don't know, you need to do some further looking into.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
that's a good point. Like, I think from the people I've tutored over the years, like it seems to be the end of term three, that swap back time is when people are sort of getting to get like a bit sick of things. They've been doing year 12 for, they've been working super hard, and that's when it gets hard. And
Yeah.
so it's good to have, some sort of social avenue, some sort of hobby pastime that you have that just keeps you going because it's not quite at the level where you can sort of count down the days. Like it's still like 2 months or 1 month for some people. And
Yeah.
every single day is just, getting work done, getting work done. So it is important, I think, yes, to have a schedule, to commit to working hard and getting lots done, but also to have those avenues to like re-energize and rest. And if you didn't bring it up, I was going to those, Among Us nights on Friday nights are probably the highlight of year 12 for me. Just being able to laugh around with everyone
Yeah.
and just see everyone again, made it a very special time.
Yeah, I think it's only in like lockdown that you realize the importance of socializing. Like you take socializing for granted at school. Like you rock up every day, you see your mates, you have a laugh, maybe have a kick of the soccer ball, whatever. But like once you're actually in lockdown, you don't talk to them, you don't see faces, and it's at that time you think, oh, we actually need this aspect in our life, right? And it is an important aspect to raise because a lot of people like, oh, I don't need, I will just study. I won't spend any time for my social life. And I think that's in my opinion, like straight away, I think that's probably a wrong mentality to be taking things. You do need the social supports. Like, you just need an avenue to reach out or rant sometimes. Like, if you're not happy about something, you're not happy about those marks. It's just to have the friend to rant about or ask for their advice. I think in those cases, just having someone to talk to is always great. And I think for me, my parents were also very, very supportive for the longest time. And in those cases, just having the parents to be able to talk to or being able to support you is also very important.
Yeah, I'd love to know more about that. Like, could you share how did your parents, like, what was your relationship like with your parents through that time and how did they support you?
Yeah, so I'm an only child. So I think for the most part, their attention was mostly on me. But I think as compared to like the stereotypical Asian tiger parents, my parents were not really like that. They were quite relaxed for the most part, and they really wanted me to enjoy what I'm doing. And they didn't really push me in my studies. They didn't really get me tutoring or anything. They were like, oh, if you're doing well, you can just continue going the way you are, right? I think for the most part, though, my parents were a great way to in my like a really important part of my like social life and mental well-being. I think is also really important to raise. I think they're always like growing up, they always took me out on the weekends to go in the outdoors, traveling, and I think in those kind of days, it's really good downtime, really good break from study, and it's a really good way to learn things outside of the books. I think that's a really important part of my life, and I think my parents really never said for me to always chase med or become a lawyer or become an engineer. And not really. Like I think for those parents out there, I think it's always important to give your children a choice about what they want to do, because in that way they can be passionate about the subjects they complete, and they can be passionate about the course that they enter, because that's a really important part. If you have no interest in something, you're not going to do it. And year 12, that really reflects. So the people that did enjoy the subjects, they will put it aside. They will say that it's their bottom two subject. And what's the point at that point? Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think there's some parents who have the mindset of like, all right, I get this call quite often where they'll say like, my kid
Yeah.
is lazy and they like I'm going to overload them with tutoring so that they at least get some things done. But what you're really doing there is you are like hammering them with work, and so then
Yeah.
in their time off when they're not in classes, they're just going to want to break, which is why they're going to appear lazy to you.
Yeah,
Whereas
exactly.
it's interesting the parents who have like this sort of hands off, like lead by example, but then like I'm here if you need me, but I'll trust you to get this done. That seems to be like what only a couple of conversations what a lot of people have been like. Now, I'm sure there's all sorts of different recipes for
Mm.
success, but it is interesting just to hear like what the people who do well, what their sort of upbringing was.
Yeah, it is interesting to see. Like, I've heard definitely different ends of the stories. I've definitely had mates that have gone through the traditional Asian tiger parenting and have done really well. But for me, I don't think it really would have worked. I think it really depends on the person as well and what you define by success, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point too. So you finished high school, got the perfect 99.95 ATAR, and then went on a Chancellor Scholarship to Melbourne Uni. Could you talk me through that decision to like, did you always know you wanted to go into med, or like why Melbourne Uni Science and Mechatronics?
Yeah, so I think I was like unsure about med, to be honest with you. Like, at that point in time in year 12, I had crossroads. Like, I either would have gone into medicine or I wanted to go into engineering. And for me, I think the most logical approach at the time was to take engineering as my undergraduate. And then through the Melbourne pathway, what it offers you is that you can do electives in other areas, such as like the medicine fields. You can do breadths in other subjects on other areas as well. And I think that really allowed me to experience engineering and medicine at the same time and really helped my decision in going to continuing in a path into medicine in my postgraduate degree. I think that was really good for me. And on top of simply learning like the engineering and the medicine side of things, it also really offered me the opportunity to partake in breadths. And I think for students coming through Monash Med, that is something that you guys don't get. But in those breadths, you learn a lot of skills. Like, for example, I took subjects on like finance and really taught me like how to manage my own finances. And for a lot of doctors out there, I think that is always a field that we need to be worried about. And investing and all those kinds of things that you take for granted are quite important. And I think those are some skills that you should learn on top of the medicine skills that you chase as well. Uh, and on top of that, I think for me, I think engineering is like still related to medicine in some ways. I think a lot of the skills that you learn in engineering is still applicable in medicine. The learning skills, like the independence in learning, is really important. But nowadays, like we have this discussion on like AI and medicine and all that, and I think in like a lot of like walks of life and a lot of careers nowadays, like coding and simple AI knowledge has become an integral part of the job application process. And I'm not sure whether medicine will take that similar approach in the future as well, whether your like some understanding of AI is important for the role. So I think it was not something that I regret doing, definitely not. I really enjoyed the pathway. But thinking back, like some people might ask me like, oh, should I do undergraduate medicine or like postgraduate medicine? And my simple answer is like, if you by the end of year 12 know that medicine is for you and it's the only thing you wanted to do for life, it is your dream job, then 100% do undergraduate medicine. It offers you the same degree in like 2 years less, right? But if you find yourself like unsure and you want to spend a bit more time finding what really suits you, I highly recommend for you to take the slightly longer path of postgraduate medicine. Those years are not wasted. The stuff that you learn is still quite valuable and you will enjoy it. But if you're already concrete and you're set on medicine, then undergraduate medicine probably is for you.
Yeah, it's like when all those memes like, oh, school teaches us about like the like geography of water, but doesn't teach us about, taxes or how to
Yeah,
change a
exactly
tire.
right. Yeah, yeah.
And it seems like you actually can learn some of the useful things for life through these breadths. And yeah, I think it's a great option for people like who are considering different things because you get to try a bit of everything.
Yeah.
And for lots of people are sort of torn a little bit. Um, and it's quite hard to sort of know you want to do med very early, particularly if your parents aren't doctors, and then you have to study for the UCAT and do all these things to get into undergrad med. But yes, you learn all these skills that you can combine, and it's interesting now, like having done engineering and then medicine, to see um, in our cohort the number of people who are doing medicine and then working out that they want to do like med tech or devices and then
Yeah.
going to do engineering after that. So all like these skills are summative, they're definitely not wasted years, and they're definitely things that you can combine in unique ways. It's a bit
Yeah.
like Steve Jobs studying calligraphy and then using that to make the fonts that came out with the Mac,
Oh, no
which he
way. Really?
yeah, which he attributed to his time at university.
Wow.
So
Yeah, I think it's like nowadays when you're finding a job or you're like in the field of medicine, what really sets you apart from your peers is not the amount of medicine that you know. It's more so about what other skills you have on top of your medicine knowledge. And I think that applies for all jobs. It's not just medicine. Yeah.
yeah, and so I think that's a really good discussion of like the difference between, the people who should be going straight for undergrad,
Yeah.
and then some people going straight into postgrad. Now, what was the sort of application like
Mm.
to postgrad med, and are there any differences between the pathway you went through and how most people get in through postgrad med?
Yeah, so I'm probably not the best person to ask in terms of like the conventional pathway into postgraduate medicine because I was fortunate to receive the Chancellor Scholarship, which basically meant that I was guaranteed a CSP position or Commonwealth supported place in postgraduate medicine as long as I pass an interview. So all I needed to do to get a spot into medicine is to pass the final interview. Whereas traditionally, to get into postgraduate medicine, they look at three different things. They look at your WAM, which is your weighted average mark. So your average mark in university. They will look at your GAMSAT score, which is kind of like the equivalent to the UCAT for undergraduate medicine, but longer and arguably a bit more tough. And they will also take into account your interview. So normally it's a three-step process in applying for like postgraduate medicine, and it is still quite hard to get into, regardless of whether you get into postgraduate or undergraduate medicine. Is still a great achievement, in my opinion.
Oh, definitely. And I'm not sure, to be honest, which one is more competitive in terms of applicants
Yeah,
and spots, but they're both very hard to get in. Uh, sitting. I've never sat the GAMSA, but I know it's very tough.
yeah, it
And the
is.
thing about postgraduate is you have lots of different unis, but also you only have one chance to get into undergrad. Like for most people, like you sit the UCAT once, or some people will take a gap year or do year 13 in some states. But
Mm,
with postgrad, people will be recurring in their applications. And so that builds up on the competitiveness. And
yeah,
you have to balance a lot of these times, a job, your uni, this GAMSAT study, and you have to manage all this at once. And so, lots of people have to sit the GAMSAT multiple times too. So it's a lot of work, but ultimately, if that's what you want to do, if you keep being disciplined, keep working hard, and sort of get the right resources and group of people around you with all some of the things that we've discussed. I think it's not something that people should give up on.
yeah, 100%. But another thing that I want to raise is like whether medicine is actually for you. And I don't know if perhaps he has talked about this. I think he probably has in his videos about whether medicine is actually the right path for you. But I'd highly recommend watching those kinds of videos to really see what the job actually entails. Because I've talked to a lot of students, especially in like year 12, thinking, oh, whether medicine's actually the job for me. And like on paper, like medicine is a job that's looks good on paper because it pays you well. It has that this like good identity in society, whatnot. But like what the job actually entails is quite a lot, and it's quite different to a lot of people, like what people expect. So I still highly recommend for students at that position to really look out and see what medicine actually involves for you. Just because your parents want you to do medicine doesn't mean that this is a field that will interest you the most. And so I highly recommend for you to watch videos such as Prabs's about like whether medicine is actually the field for you.
It's a good point because
Yeah.
I remember I didn't know much about it in year 12, even by the time
Yeah.
I was sort of applying. And I sort of like looked up like what is a specialty and all these
Yeah.
things. And like even like completing uni now, it's completely different to what I thought it was. So it'd be interesting as like as a test. If you're someone out there who wants to do med, like
Mm.
can you actually like explain for 5 minutes what the life of a doctor is and how you get to like that
Yeah.
particular stage? It'd
Yeah.
just be interesting for yourself to like work out how much you actually know what you're getting into down the line.
Yeah.
Because yeah, a lot of people will finish and then actually realize like I think lots of people think of like a GP or an emergency
Yeah,
doctor when they think of
yeah,
um, what like what a doctor does. And but even to get to that stage, after you finish med, is still like a number of years just to get to that stage. And so this is the established like boss level. It's a bit like looking at the senior partner of a law firm and saying, "Hey, I want that job," and
yeah, exactly.
you miss all the in between jobs in between. So yeah, it's a great profession, great field.
Yeah,
But we have to just be skeptical of, looking at Harvey Specter and saying, I'd love to be a
yeah,
lawyer,
exactly.
without, forgetting all those interns who are also in suits. So maybe why med for you? I know you did engineering in your undergrad, so
Mm.
so why medicine?
I don't know. That's a really good question, and I feel like I'm getting interviewed right now for medicine. But I think going through university, I think what I really did enjoy, I love the human sciences subjects. There was something that I was really passionate about, and I think Privacy probably remembers me talking about all the anatomy and physiology back in my undergraduate days. But I think on top of that, like in all honesty, the job for a doctor is so multifaceted. Like no 2 days will be very, very similar to each other. And there's this social aspect that just cannot be recreated in like a field like engineering. Engineering just didn't really offer me what I really wanted in terms of like social interactions and like job satisfaction. Like a lot of times you're working with these projects, and these projects a lot of the times will need to be completed with other people potentially, but it's really highly reliant on that group of people that you work with. And in engineering, for my undergraduate degree, I've had some bad experiences with group work, for example, and I also had some like poor experiences like in the actual job like setting. And I think that was probably what drew me away from that field slightly. Whereas I think medicine really offered me the diversity that I really wanted. And I found myself just much more interested in that area as per se. And I felt like that for medicine. There's a bit more satisfaction because every time you have an interaction with a patient, you potentially acting as part one like very very large part of their life when you think about it, right? Like a minute conversation with a patient could be potentially life changing for the most part, and oftentimes like you walk out of the job feeling that you've done something really great. Whereas in engineering, I don't think that's the satisfaction that you can as like replicate as much in that case. But it's interesting to see from you, perhaps, have you seen like many students who completed undergraduate medicine but totally regretted going into medicine to begin with?
Good point, actually. I think there's lots of people who, not lots of people, but there's a few people who realize it's not for them. I think there are unfortunately some people who complete undergraduate medicine and like they say, I just did this because my parents wanted me to.
Yeah.
uh, I actually want to do business or like fashion or something like that. That is the vast minority, but I think for the most part people are very happy, people are very passionate in med, because of what you said. There's such a big diversity. If you prefer like being introverted, you don't want to deal with patients much, there's radiology. If you love interacting with people, then like lots of the physician specialties are there.
Yeah.
If you really enjoy getting the good patient outcomes and thank you cards, like there's specialties that have really good outcomes. If you like doing cool life-saving surgeries, risky stuff, then like there's something for you. So like you'll eventually like work out based on your personality and based on your desires, like which sort of field fits. But there's such a vast variety. And another great thing about medicine is the people you're with.
Yeah, I was
Um,
just gonna say that. Literally just when you were talking about that, I was like, the people you're with definitely makes this profession so good. Yeah.
yeah, everyone's worked like so hard to get into med, so it's amazing to hear like what people's stories are, to get inspired by having this great group of people around you. People who are like competent, professional, passionate, intelligent, and it really brings out the best in yourself when you're surrounded by people like that, I think, as well. So
Mm.
that's been an incredible thing for me to experience over the last few years.
Yeah.
So now that you've done your schooling, you've done your undergraduate degree, and you're now entering medicine,
Hmm.
how how are you studying now, and what are some things you've learned about learning and studying along the way?
Yeah, so I think medicine is quite a different field for as compared to like year 12 studies. It is totally independent. So the way that uni is set out, at least for Melbourne Uni, for medicine, all the lectures are delivered online and pre-recorded. So you have to watch it in your own time, and you can watch it whenever you want, wherever you want, right? So the onus is on you to really do your own planning ahead of time. So just as I said, in year 12 it was really important to plan ahead. It is just, if not more important, to plan ahead now in uni, making sure that I finish off all the lectures for the week beforehand, and then supplementing it with your own further readings. And in medicine, this might look like online question banks. It might look like in the form of physical textbooks. It might look like the form of like online articles from like Up to Date, for example. So just being able to supplement your learning in that learning phase. And I think on top of that, Anki is another thing that has to be brought up when you're thinking medicine. So Anki is a software that uses active recall. So it's a flashcard software where you essentially helps you memorize things. I think that is something that I've definitely used a lot in first year medicine in Melbourne, but in second year, probably less so. And I think the best part about Anki is actually making the cards themselves, right? So making the cards themselves, I think, is a good way to really consolidate your own learning. And it's a really good way to summarize your understanding. Yeah, putting all you learn from that week into a few flashcards is a good way to summarize your own learning. I think that's probably the way I use Anki for the most part. I don't think I can stay up to date with all the flashcards, like all 5,000 of the flashcards. I have had friends, I do know friends that completely base their notes on Anki, which I don't think is something that is suitable for me. The way I do my notes is, I know it's quite controversial. I do handwrite my notes, and then I convert my handwritten notes into like online versions, online summarized versions. And the way that I set out my notes is in a way that I have a glossary of different medical conditions, a glossary of different drugs. It's just that it's easier for me to go through things as I learn. The lectures are great, but I don't think it teaches it in the way that I want it. I wanted to set out such that I can navigate through my notes much more easily. And on top of that, I think a really important part of medicine is being able to apply the knowledge. So question banks are excellent for that. And the last thing I do want to mention in medicine is that nowadays, or well, actually in the field of medicine, one really important part is the actual like patient interaction, be it like taking histories or performing examinations, I think, or giving counseling. I think in those cases, that's quite a different part as compared to other professions. That part of medicine is really important. And the only real way to learn or be really good at that is putting it into practice in the real life scenario. And that means attending placements, being actively engaged in placements, being confident. Like even like me myself, I wouldn't say I'm the most confident person. Um, Definitely, probably like before medicine, I was probably on the shy side, and I think being able to actually stand up and volunteer to do things in class or volunteer to do things in placements is an excellent way to learn. You will get feedback from these other doctors or the nurses around you, and I think that's a great way to really improve your skills. So it's important to think about medicine not just as the book skills, but also the people skills that you have, as well as your clinical skills as well. I think that's a really important part. And the learning will be very different in terms of the book skills as compared to the clinical skills.
That's a great point because once you start going to placement, you'll realize that there's a particular case where you learn more just by like
Yeah,
often just by going home and doing your own studying. But the skills you learn at placement by speaking to patients and doing the examinations, you can only really learn
yeah,
effectively in that environment. And so there's trade-offs you make between like I guess one of the challenges for us was that all our practical exams were pass or fail, whereas with our written exams, you get a mark from 0 to 99. So it was once you've secured the pass on the practical exams, you just optimize for the written ones. But you know, it is something that people who have the future in mind need to like spend the time with the patients working out histories and exams because those are skills that require time to practice and require sort of face to face and actual
Yeah.
practical application, uh, which is tricky because obviously that is not the most efficient use of your time when you just think about the written exams, which we're sort of built to care a bit more about, I think, with our background in the
Yeah.
ATAR and previous subjects too.
Yeah, that's an interesting case. I think we're like Melbourne is slightly different because we do get like a score for our like Viva exams or our like clinical exams as well. And in that case, I think sometimes like I find myself probably a bit more stressed about the Viva or in-person exams because you get physical feedback from around. I think that's a really good part to like improve. Um, but yeah, it's interesting seeing that the unis do things differently. I know that most unis like opt for the pass or fail system now. Even Melbourne Uni does, but we do get marks for all of our assessments. Yes.
Yeah, that could be a whole different episode on
Yeah, exactly.
what
Yeah.
we think of the pass fail system.
Yeah.
But yes, I think what you've said about studying med there is very important. Everyone has different styles that work best for themselves, and it's just about experimenting with the different types. So for you, how do you convert handwritten notes to online notes? Do you have
Mm.
some sort of software for that?
No, I don't use any
You
software. I
literally
think
just type it out.
yeah, I type it out. I think if you use software, yes, it saves times, but like the whole point of me putting the online notes is not just to be able to access it later, but also it's like a secondary consolidation process. Like sometimes when I'm writing down notes, like handwritten notes, when I'm watching a lecture, kind of like I find myself quite mindlessly writing down notes. But when I actually physically convert it into like a typed version, I pick and choose what I write down, and I really ask myself, well, did the thing I write down actually make sense the way it was written down, or do I need to do a bit more research, or am I actually understanding this, or is there a reason why this might be occurring, or is there a reason why this complication may occur due to another condition or something like that? I think it's just a way for me to consolidate things rather than just being able to access the notes later, which is still an important part.
Yeah. And so do you like just sort of look at the notes and type them on straight away, or do you sort of put the notes away, type what you remember, and then look back and say, oh, what did I miss here?
Yes, I think the latter is probably more true. I try to keep my notes away, and try to write down what I remember and then edit it, going back as well. I think that's probably like a way to actively recall, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense because then you get like a review of
Yeah,
the lecture material, and then when you ask like, hey, why is this the case? What could be the reason for this? That's
yeah,
another way of you sort of actively thinking about the particular topic, and also exposes some of the material you don't know and then need to go and learn more of.
yeah. So, and once you actually like master the content, I guess, again, applying your knowledge by teaching someone else or helping someone else that might be struggling in the content, I think is probably another way to really consolidate it further.
Yeah, yeah, and it's probably hard to gauge, but how many hours would you spend sort of at placement in a week or studying in a week?
Yeah. So Melbourne Uni suggests like 20 hours in placements. I'm probably doing maybe closer to 30 hours each week, in terms of placements, give or take, depending on the rotation. Some rotations are,
Is that over 5 days?
yeah, that's over 5 days, yes.
Okay. So
So around, yeah, because we're like full-time placements, we're basically there every single day. I know that some people do more, some people do less. That's probably the gauge for me. And on top of that, I think this like the behind the scenes study, I think probably averages out to around 2 to 3 hours after class, after placements each day, probably around that time. So it's honestly like medicine is more so like a full-time job, maybe 8 hours each day, um, all on this. But you should still have some time left for social life and socializing and all that. So I think it worked out for me. But that basically just meant that some days I stayed for a bit longer in intern, like in my placements, whereas other days I headed out early. Yeah, depending on what kind of scenario we have.
yeah, it sounds like a lot of time when you say like 8 hours, but then like we forget that we did school from
Yeah,
nine
exactly
to
right.
3:30, and then it's like school with like a small bit of homework or like no homework at all.
It
You know,
literally
the
is, yeah. Like I've probably spent roughly same amount of time in now like in uni as compared to school. But obviously you have that less of that playtime and that socializing time that you get in school as compared to in like uni. Another thing that I want to potentially compare it to is engineering, for example. Like some people say, oh, medicine is very, very tough. Spend it all the time, which is definitely very true. But it's sometimes like if you're like studying medicine, sometimes you view like other like other degrees as being easier, which is not necessarily the case. I think I can tell you from experience, engineering is much, much more difficult. It's because of like the amount of applied knowledge you actually need to know, and the amount of work I was working behind the scenes. I was definitely doing more than 2 to 3 hours after class each day on my projects and all that. And I think every single degree that you go into will be very similar in terms of the workload. But then again, it's about like how much effort you put in.
Yeah, and sometimes you have with med and the pre-recorded lectures, you have flexibility
Yeah,
with
exactly.
how you use those 2 or 3 hours. You know, you might like get them done first thing in the morning, and then all of a sudden at like 3 p.m. you're done for the day. Or you might, want to have a late lunch with someone and then do those things like late at night. So that's a nice thing is you can sort of cater those around your life and make time for the things that you find important.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, and then I guess to wrap this up, I assume the people who watch this are sort of those year 11, 12 students, or maybe the early in uni and people are in med or interested in med. What advice would you give to these students?
Yeah, what advice would I give them? I think first of all, choose what you enjoy to do. Choose the subjects you enjoy, um, and choose subjects that will suit you well. Yeah, think about which subjects go together well, and that will probably be the best choice heading into year 12. And I think in year 12, main thing is to really work hard. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Your tutors, your teachers, they're all there to help you, your peers. So make sure that you make the most of it to ask lots of questions. And when you're picking your uni course or degree, I think the most important thing is to choose something that you've researched. Don't go into something blindly, and make sure that you think that this is going to be an area that you will enjoy. Just be assured that even if you go into medicine or you go into another field that you're not sure about and you end up hating it, it's never too late to change. Like for me, it probably took me 2 more years, or it's going to take me 2 more years to become a doctor as compared to like Prabsy. But like regardless of which way you take, I think you'll get there in the end. And sometimes taking the longer road will allow you to explore opportunities that you would not have the opportunity to really experience in the more direct pathway. That's the way I put it. So don't be afraid to be different to other people. Always be hardworking. Always be on top of things, planning things ahead. I think these are probably the biggest pieces of advice I can give year 11, year 12 students.
That's great. And there's been so many important takeaways here. And I love just having spoken to yourself, Daniel, Darren, just there's so many things that you're all doing differently, but
Mm,
you're all incredibly successful in everything that you do. And then there are some similarities as well. Having the courage to ask questions
yeah.
rather than keeping things to yourself. Being disciplined with a planner and organizing yourself, having time for your passions and something outside of studying to reward yourself and keep yourself going. I think has been a key part of how you've all been successful, not just in year 12, but also over a very long period of time now. We're 5 years out of school. So thank you very much for sharing these insights with everyone. They've been tremendously useful for me, and I hope for everyone else. And hopefully catch up soon.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me today, Ethan. I hope the people that are listening could take something away from this. But yeah, thank you very much.